Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. In today's video, I'm gonna be sharing with you the process to install an invisible zipper following the industry method. So let's begin. Before installing your zipper, it's important to take into consideration the zipper size. Invisible zippers come in numbers. Number 2 for lightweight garments, number 3 and 4 for medium weight garments, and number 5 and 6 for heavyweight garments. This number also determines the width of the zipper. This kind of zipper is extremely delicate. It rips super easily, so it's important to select the adequate size based on your project. Here you can see the reverse view of some of my invisible zippers. As you see, they come in different sizes and also in different materials, so you can adapt them better to your specific project. All of these are for lightweight or medium weight garments, except for this one. This one, as you can see, is heavier, it's thicker, and it's still an invisible zipper. So this is the kind of zipper that I recommend for bridal evening wear garments or garments that are heavy, two-fitted, or have so many layers of fabric. The size of the zipper is also important because it defines the seam allowance of the garment. Even though half an inch is the regular seam allowance that we use for invisible zippers, it might change depending on the size of your zipper and your project. The length of your zipper is also important, and it will be set based on the length of your actual garment. However, as a reference, it's important that when you place your zipper, it opens enough that you can get your hips through. If you are using my patterns, you will have a zipper notch at the back of the garment as a reference. To install your zipper, you just need your pattern pieces, of course, your invisible zipper. Normally we choose the color of the zipper similar to the color of the fabric and the same for the thread. And then I have here my regular and my invisible zipper presser foot. They might look different depending on the kind of machine that you are using. The pre-sewing tips are completely optional, but they may be helpful in case you want to achieve better results. The first tip is to add fusing tape on the zipper seam. This is highly recommended if you are working with a lightweight fabric and the width of the fusing tape should be the same as your seam allowance. Otherwise, it wouldn't make any sense. Just steam it, press it, and that's it. The second tip will be serge the fabric edges. The third one will be press the zipper carefully. Last but not least, open the zipper teeth. With your tip of your iron, you can open the zipper teeth, pushing them a little bit away, so this area will be more relaxed when sewing. Just for the sake of the demonstration, I decided to add some style lines into my patterns. In this way, I can show you my tips and tricks to align style lines within the invisible zipper. First, we're going to start closing the bottom of our piece. And to do that, we will use the zipper notch that you will have as a reference if you are working with my patterns. We are going to start closing from the bottom up, leaving or opening at the top to install the zipper. The seam allowance will be half an inch, and if you are working with my patterns, no worries, the seam allowance will be indicated. Don't forget to back tack at the beginning and at the end of the seam. If you don't have a zipper notch in your patterns as a reference, what you need to do is just place your zipper on the seam, find the bottom zipper stop just at the end, and mark. I'm just gonna mark the point as a reference for you, so you're gonna get a better visual, but you don't need to do this. What you need to do is from the stopper of the zipper, you need to mark at least 1 inch up. And then you can sew all the way from the bottom up until you get to your zipper notch, just as we did in the previous step. When using this technique, you will have an allowance of 1 inch in between your seam and your zipper stopper. This gap will allow you to take your zipper puller all the way down so it won't be in your way when sewing. This will allow you to have a more precise sewing and a more professional finish. And then press your seams open. Then check the measurement of your zipper tape above the top stop. This measurement should be equal to the seam allowance that you will be using to clean the top area of your garment. If your zipper tape is longer, just mark the difference. Make sure you have enough room there for your seam allowance, and you can either cut the excess right now or trim it later when you are cleaning that area. If you decide to trim it later, so it's important that you mark the point where your seam allowance ends because you are going to use that as a reference to place your zipper on the garment. Then open your zipper and place it on top of the garment facing right side together. Make sure you are placing the right side of the zipper because you need to flip it later to attach the other side. When placing the zipper, we need to take into consideration the mark that we just did above the top stop. We need to align that mark with the edge of our fabric. In this case, since I'm working with a skirt, I'm going to align that with the edge of my waistline. Then I'm going to place my zipper, making sure the edge of the zipper tape is aligned with the edge of the fabric. Now I'm going to install my regular zipper presser foot and I'm going to baste my zipper. I'm going to use the longest stitch that I have available in the machine and I'm going to make sure to stitch as close to the teeth of the zipper as possible. This is just a temporary stitch, but make sure you back tack at the beginning and at the end of the seam. Keep basting the zipper until you get around the zipper notch. You can continue sewing even half an inch below the zipper notch, but then just stop. Leave the rest of the tail of the zipper hanging free. If you have a style line within your zipper, it's important that both sides of it match perfectly. So to do that, I will recommend you to mark first on the zipper the point where the line or the style line is. Then make sure you align that mark that you just place on your zipper with the style line that you have in the other side of the zipper that you are just gonna attach right now. Once the position is secure, I'm just gonna base this side of the zipper using the longest stitch that I have in my machine, trying to stitch as close as possible to the teeth of the zipper and back tacking at the beginning and at the end of the seam. Now it's time to check that everything is sitting right in the zipper, that the style lines meet, and that we don't have any wrinkles or any issues there. Personally, I feel this method is the most accurate one, so hopefully you will be able to get your zipper right just at the first try, but sometimes aligning the style lines might be a little bit more complicated and you might need more than one try. So just take your time, be patient. This is just a matter of practicing. If the zipper is sitting right, we are ready to start with the last stitch and we're going to install our invisible zipper presser foot. This zipper has channels in the bottom of it that are going to help us to get really close to the teeth of the zipper. We need to be really careful to not stitch on top of the zipper teeth, but as close as we can. And we are just going to stitch all the way through until we get to the bottom. When getting to the bottom, make sure you open your seam allowance and you pull all the way down your zipper puller. So you are going to be able to continue sewing as regular until you reach a point where the machine is not going to continue sewing. Like you are going to see that you try to go further and it's not going to be possible, and this is because you get to the point of your previous seam. So when you get there, don't force it, just back tack and release it. Now repeat the exact procedure that we just did in the other side of the seam. Now you just close your zipper to make sure that everything is sitting right, that the style lines align, that you don't have any important or major wrinkles, and that's it. You just need to give it a good press to the seam because it's gonna change a lot how the zipper looks. If by any chance at some point you need to use a longer zipper than needed and you have a really long tail hanging, what you need to do is check where the seam of your zipper stops, and from there measure down at least 1.5–2 inches, so that will be the remaining of your tail. At that point you can cut the tail. Remember to leave it hanging, don't attach it to the fabric, but at some point in that tail you can make a stopper just to make this area more secure in case of something, and you can make that stopper by hand or carefully using your sewing machine. And when you're ready, just trim the excess. This is how the invisible zipper looks once it's done. Please stay tuned because in a following video I will be showing you how to install a waistband and a facing with an invisible zipper. I hope this demonstration was helpful and thank you so much for watching. I will see you very soon in my next video. Take care!